Imagine crossing the finish line of your marathon with a smile on your face, feeling strong and energized, and even hitting your realistic goal pace. It's possible, and in this video, I'll show you how. So in my last video, we talked about training strategies to implement to make sure that you are prepared for your upcoming race day, to make sure that you don't hit the wall. Now we know that what we do in training highly dictates how our race is going to go, essentially, if we are prepared for the mileage or if we're not prepared. So when we're talking about hitting the wall, that's essentially something that happens around mile 18 to 20, and it really feels like this completely depleted energy state. Your legs aren't functioning properly, your brain isn't even functioning properly, and usually happens really for one or two reasons. Number one, that you run out of the carb stores, that your body can only store so much, and or number two, a lack of strength and muscular endurance to really go the distance. So if you have not watched that first video in this short series about how to train properly to avoid hitting the wall, I suggest that you check that out. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about what to do on race day, that you have a plan going in so that all of your hard work isn't just wasted, and that you have the key tools that you need to smash through that wall in your marathon. So number one is fuel properly. So getting in enough carbs to counteract the effects of your body utilizing the carbs that are already stored in your body is extremely important, and only comes from you actually eating and fueling properly before the run and during the run itself. So this really starts leading up to race day and making sure that you are doing like a proper carbo load. It's maybe not historically what you think, but really you're essentially eating about the same that you would normally. You're just making up the bulk of what you would typically eat with carbs. That's really important starting a few days before your race, definitely the day before and the morning of, that you are getting enough carbs in your body so that you're really front loading and starting that process of holding on to more carbs and allowing your body to start having that readily available to use. Then once you start the race, you should be focused on having about 50 to 70 plus grams of carbs per hour. Really, the more the better if your body is able to handle having more, but this really comes back to how much you trained with. You don't want to completely do something new on race day, but in order to really have what you need to fuel properly, the minimum is really 50 grams of carbs per hour. I like to think of this in terms of about 2 gels per hour or 1 gel every 30 minutes. Usually a gel has about 25 grams of carbs, give or take. And so that puts us at that 50 grams of carbs mark per hour. But there's definitely ones out there that have more. If you can find those, that's great. I also like to supplement with using liquid carbs. I used Tailwind, and that is a really easy way for me to bump those carbs up and make sure that I'm getting more like 65 to 75 grams of carbs per hour. And I'm a small person, so I'm doing this as well. Someone who's bigger can probably withstand taking even more, but everybody's a little bit different. Our bodies don't work in the same way, which is why training is so important. Then you can figure out what works for you. But essentially, you want to be making sure you're getting enough carbs beforehand in those days leading up. That morning of, have a really solid breakfast with a lot of carbs. Maybe you're taking a gel about 15 minutes before the start of your race, and then you have that plan of, at a minimum, taking 2 gels per hour so that your body has the glycogen readily available to use, because we know that our bodies are most efficient at using carb stores for our energy. So one of the best ways that you can avoid that wall, that really depleted feeling that you're feeling in your body, that you're feeling in your brain, is by having those carbs fueling. It's really, really important. Okay, number 2, I talk about this all the time. In fact, my daughter just had a cross country meet, her first one yesterday, and she came out of the gate at the very end, conservative start, you guys. It's so important, and she's heard me say it enough times when she's practicing that even for her 2-mile race, she wanted to pace herself and make sure that she went out slow. And of course, there was that whole pack of kids that was going out way too fast and burned out, and she managed her race much better. And it's so important in these longer races. It's one of the most important things that you can do in the marathon is figure out how to pace yourself well and to hold back in the beginning, because most people are going out way too fast. They feel good and they don't realize that they're gonna burn out super quickly by doing that. A lot of times where people are like, I felt great till the half marathon mark, and things just kind of started dwindling and getting worse and worse till at mile 18, mile 20. That's what I see happening a lot. And so it's really important that you do pull back, that you go a lot slower than you think that you should. And I always like to remind my athletes, the marathon is really long. You have a lot of mileage, time in front of you to make up that time. If you're going for a goal time, it's so much better to have that focus on the negative split where you are running slower in that first half and running faster in that second half. So really the goal is you're gradually increasing the pace as you go. This is also why it's really important that when you go into race day, you have a pretty clear idea of what you can handle for a pace, what time you've trained for, what your training has shown that you're ready for, what your previous races have shown that you're ready for in the marathon. It's really important to nail that down. And you're starting, anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds per mile slower than that pace that you're targeting. You definitely want to be starting slower than your targeted goal pace, and you can always make it up later. That would be the goal, obviously. So if you're saying to yourself, I don't really know what pace, I'm going for, I don't really know what time I could do, I don't really have a pacing strategy at all, I really recommend that you check out my video about figuring out your goal pace, that it is dependent on a lot of different factors. So I will link that video up here. Really, really important as you go into your race and trying to determine what is the pace that I'm going for? What is the time that I'm going for? Even if it's your first marathon, which usually I recommend the goal is to finish and not get fixated on a time or a time goal, it's still really important to have some idea of what you probably can accomplish, even if that's focusing on your easy pace that you've been running and training, which is totally fine. But what pace is that? Starting a little bit slower than that so that you can build and finish strong and finish faster than you started. I promise you can do it. That's one of the things I hear a lot is like, everyone else can do it. I don't think that I can do it. You absolutely can. And it comes a lot from training that way, which I talked about in that previous video. So number 3 is allowing yourself to adjust to effort. So even though having an idea of pace is important, having a pace strategy or a loose one at least is important. Even more important is having an understanding of your effort and tapping into that, knowing how long you can feel a certain way and how long you're going to be able to hold that particular effort. So this comes a lot back to training and you paying attention to that in training. But what I see happen on race day a lot is that people have a pacing strategy. They have a goal time. People get very fixated on this pace that they have to be right around this pace the entire time, no matter what. And it really gets people into trouble because it doesn't allow them to conservative start, what I just talked about previously. It also doesn't allow them to make adjustments on the fly that they need to based on how they're feeling. And we know that a lot of factors go into race day, especially in the marathon. A lot of different things can happen because it is such a long race. You really are out there for a long time. We know that weather makes a big difference. If it's a hot day, you're going to naturally have to go slower, that your effort is going to be higher at a pace that would be maybe comfortable for you on a hot day. It's not comfortable for you. So it's really important that you tap into that effort and you adjust based on how you're feeling. So if that pace that you originally planned on, even if it's 15 seconds per mile slower than your goal pace and you have this plan to start conservatively, if it already feels hard early on, that's your clue that you need to slow down even more. And I know this can be really, really hard because it starts to feel like, oh no, my goal is out the window, which isn't necessarily true. But the reality is if you don't listen to your body, if you don't make those adjustments early on, you're going to have an incredibly challenging race. It's not going to be fun for you. You're going to end up actually with a way worse time than if you would have just adjusted early on and listened to your body signals and adjusted back to the effort, slowing down. On the flip side, you can also go the other way with a pacing strategy. I tell my athletes this all the time. If you're late in the race and you feel great, and we've got kind of these pace bands for you, late in the race, you get to start making those decisions for yourself of letting yourself go faster, letting yourself open it up a little bit more. If you've only got 6-8 miles and you feel great, Awesome. That means you probably did all the right things beforehand, and you get to start pushing that pace and knowing that you can hold that higher effort for that particular amount of time. And this leads us into number 4, which is to run your own race and trust yourself. So let's talk about pacers, shall we? I've talked about this before on the channel, and I just want you guys to know I really don't have anything against pacers, and truly the people who are out there, you know, volunteering their time to pace is really awesome. And I know there's many of them who do a really great job. Unfortunately, I've had enough experience with athletes using pacers that I know there are also plenty out there who really don't know what they're doing. And I've just seen too many times where they don't do a conservative start. They start out too fast, or, you know, even when there's really big hills, they're still maintaining that same pace, which is the exact opposite of what we just talked about of tapping into effort, because part of tapping into effort is slowing down when you're going up a hill, because obviously it's going to be more challenging at that same pace, whereas going downhill, it's less challenging, right? So things like that you need to be mindful of if you are choosing to run with a pacer. So just if you are, really think that through, and also know that you're going to be willing to adjust to what you need to do and run your own race if the pacer doesn't seem to be following the plan that you had in your mind. Because I know there's strength in numbers. I do know that there can be power in that, so I don't want to dismiss that. I just want to make sure that you don't end up in a situation you're running with a pacer and all of a sudden they went way too fast and you're burning out, and you know, are in the midst of hitting the wall because you went out too fast, because we know that pacing is so important. The flip side of that too is making sure that you're not paying attention to the runners around you and what they're doing. I'll go back to the hill thing again. I can't tell you how many runners I see trying to just push up the hill, go as fast as possible to get it over with, when that's the complete opposite of what you should be doing. You should be slowing down, conserving energy as you're going up those hills. And so when I talk to athletes about this, it's just like, why would you copy a person who you know nothing about? You don't know their strategy, you don't know their training. That's not a good idea. You know what you're capable of, and you need to be able to trust yourself, your training, knowing this is your race and no one else's, and everybody's is going to end up different and run differently, different paces. And you're just gonna have a much better race that way, and a much higher likelihood of getting to those late miles and feeling good when you get there, feeling strong and being able to not hit a wall and continue on and have a really strong last 10K. So number 5, use those mental strategies. So just because you get to mile 20, having avoided the wall, knowing that the wall is not in sight, you're feeling strong and good, does not mean that that last 10K isn't going to be incredibly challenging. This is a race after all. You have a particular goal. If you're newer, maybe the goal is to finish, and so you're just gonna kind of keep on trucking along at that same pace, feeling good, and that's awesome. For other people who have a goal pace in mind, you're gonna be pushing yourself, or you're gonna wanna find out what you can do and how fast you can go. And that just means that you've done all the right things to put yourself into a position to get to race. It's such an amazing feeling to get to mile 20 and know that you're ready to do this. You're ready to hurt in a different way, that your legs actually feel pretty strong. Doesn't mean they're not going to be uncomfortable. Your brain is pretty clear and focused and ready to do the work. It's such an incredible place to be, and it's an honor to get to have that. And so you want to use it wisely, and that also means that you're going to start putting yourself in a pain cave and have some of these painful miles that feel much more like your cardiovascular endurance is being pushed versus your legs feeling like lead or bricks and not being able to move them along. It's just a really empowering feeling, and until you've been there, it's really hard to explain, but they are two completely different kinds of hard. We want the hard where you get to race, you get to the 10K and the race finally starts and you say, here we go, I'm gonna dig in, dig deep, see what I'm capable of, because I know that it's a lot more than I think that I can. So be ready to tap into all those positive mantras. You are still going to need them so that you can push to your fastest pace possible with the goal of that negative split, where you're fastest miles being those last miles. And you can run through that finish line, as we talked about in the very beginning, feeling strong, feeling energized, and feeling like you can't wait to do that again. So if you guys are interested in getting more help with this, I know it can be hard putting all of the pieces together when we're talking about everything you need to do in training, everything to do on race day. That's what our team of coaches is here for. So I'm going to go ahead and put our coaching information below. We'd be happy to hear from you. I also do race strategy calls, which are 1 hour, which can be a great way to just kind of lock in your pacing strategy, talk more about that effort, what you should be feeling at certain parts of the race. Finalize your fueling strategy, anything like that. As always, if you guys have questions, please place them below. I'm always happy to answer, and I'll catch you in the next one.